most prominent muscle of the buttocks region is the gluteus maximus. It is superficial and overlies other gluteal and rotator muscles in the region. It originates on the ilium, sacrum, and coccyx. The muscle fibers of the gluteus maximus travel laterally in an oblique orientation and insert on the gluteal tuberosity of the femur and the iliotibial tract. This muscle is a powerful extensor and lateral rotator of the thigh. A muscle located in the anterolateral thigh region is the tensor fasciae lati. It arises from the anterior iliac crest and the anterior superior iliac spine. It is surrounded by fascial planes of tissue which blend into the iliotibial tract. The tensor assists in flexion, abduction, and medial rotation of the thigh at the hip joint. The sartorius muscle of the anterior thigh region is the longest muscle in the body. It originates primarily on the anterior superior iliac spine and travels obliquely over the thigh to insert medially on the proximal tibia. Since it crosses two joints in its course, it has actions at both the hip and the knee. These include flexion, abduction, and lateral rotation of the thigh and flexion of the leg. It has been called the tailor's muscle because the actions of this muscle produce the typical cross-legged sitting position characteristic of tailors. The largest muscle mass of the anterior thigh is the quadriceps femoris, which is actually 4 separate muscles. One of these muscles, the rectus femoris, originates above the hip joint on the anterior inferior iliac spine and superior lip of the acetabulum. The other 3 muscles have their origins on the lateral, medial, and anterior femur. The largest and most lateral position is the vastus lateralis. The vastus medialis, which is seen more clearly in this view, arises on the medial aspect of the femur. The vastus intermedius lies underneath the rectus femoris on the anterior surface of the femur. All 4 muscles have a common tendon of insertion into the tibial tuberosity by way of the patellar ligament, and as a group extend the leg to the knee. Since the rectus femoris also crosses the hip joint anteriorly, it flexes the thigh. The most superficial of the medially located adductor muscles of the thigh is the gracilis. Its origin is on the inferior pubis. It travels inferiorly to insert on the medial surface of the proximal tibia. Since it originates above the hip and inserts below the knee, it too has actions at both joints. In addition to weak adduction of the thigh, it also produces flexion of the leg. 2 muscles located on the posterior thigh, which belong to the hamstring group, are the biceps femoris and the femoris tendinosus. The biceps femoris, like the biceps brachii, has 2 heads of origin. One of these heads, the long head, originates above the hip joint on the ischial tuberosity. It descends and is joined by the short head, which arises from the lateral supracondylar line and linea aspera of the femur. The common tendon from the 2 heads inserts on the head of the fibula and the lateral condyle of the tibia. The semitendinosus shares a common tendon of origin with the long head of the biceps femoris on the ischial tuberosity. As the name suggests, it has a long tendon which passes medially through the knee region and inserts on the proximal part of the medial surface of the tibia near the tendons of sartorius and gracilis. The primary actions of the biceps femoris and the semitendinosus are to extend the thigh at the hip joint and to flex the leg at the knee. These actions play important roles in walking and running, and sometimes during rigorous exercise, these tendons can be pulled from the ischial tuberosity, resulting in the sports injury known as a pulled hamstring. 2 muscles The gastrocnemius and the soleus form the calf of the leg and are located posteriorly. The most superficial muscle, the gastrocnemius, is a large two-headed muscle which arises from the medial and lateral condyles of the femur. Lying underneath the gastrocnemius is the soleus, which is named because it looks like a sole flatfish. It originates from the proximal tibia and fibula. The gastrocnemius and soleus share a large common tendon, the calcaneum, or Achilles tendon, which inserts into the calcaneus. When these muscles contract, the foot is plantar flexed at the ankle joint, which results in raising the heel off the floor. This action is very important in walking and jumping. The tibialis anterior also produces movements of the foot at the ankle. This muscle lies lateral to the anterior surface of the tibia and can be palpated easily. It originates from the lateral condyle and upper half or two-thirds of the tibia and the interosseous membrane between the tibia and fibula. Its muscle fibers and tendons descend from a lateral to a more medial position to insert on the first cuneiform and base of the first metatarsal bones. Contraction of the tibialis anterior produces dorsiflexion of the foot at the ankle joint, which is antagonistic to the action of plantar flexion by the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles. Because of its oblique orientation, it can also act to invert the foot. The primary muscle used for extension of the toes is also located on the anterior surface of the leg. The extensor digitorum longus lies lateral to the tibialis anterior and arises from the proximal fibula, lateral tibial condyle, and the interosseous membrane. It descends vertically and divides into 4 separate tendons on the dorsum of the foot, which insert on the middle and distal phalanges of the 4 lateral toes. In addition to extension of the toes, it also works synergistically with the tibialis anterior to dorsiflex the foot. The peroneus longus is the most superficial muscle located in the lateral portion of the leg. It arises from the head and proximal two-thirds of the fibula and the intermuscular septum. Its tendon of insertion travels behind the lateral malleolus of the fibula, and then it curves under the foot to insert immediately on the first cuneiform and first metatarsal bones. Contraction of the peroneus longus produces eversion of the foot, which is antagonistic to the action of inversion produced by the tibialis anterior. It does, however, work in synergy with the gastrocnemius and soleus to produce plantar flexion. You have just seen a few of the muscles on the cadaver which are responsible for some of the movements our bodies perform every day. As you know, there are many muscles in the body. We have tried to present representative muscles which produce important actions. In addition, the origins and insertions were described for each muscle demonstrated.